what is my body here for and how am I supposed to relate to it? And what is the power dynamic between me and my body?
Welcome to the Live Unrestricted podcast, a show where you'll learn how to heal your relationship with food and your body so that you can focus your time and energy on more important things like your personal growth. I'm your host, Sabrina Magna, food freedom coach, and my mission is to help make your life happier and healthier without stress, overwhelm, or guilt about food. If you love the show, please do go out and share it. And if you're looking for support with your relationship with food, details about my programs are in the show notes. Thanks for spending time with me today. Now let's jump in. Okay, so I just have to tell you that I just got off my interview with today's guest, which is the biggest guest that I've had on this podcast so far. I am so excited to share that interview and that conversation with you. But I will have to admit, I was really nervous before this interview. And I'm sharing this because I want you to know that it's so easy to look at maybe people that you look up to. This is not me saying that you look up to me at all, but it is easy to look at people on Instagram, social media, people who are running businesses or who are coaches, and to think that they have it all figured out and that they never feel nervous and that they never feel doubt or imposter syndrome. And as someone who is constantly surrounded by high-level coaches and people who are doing really amazing things in their business, I can tell you that that could not be further from the truth. Everyone feels these same emotions of nerves and imposter syndrome and your nervous system sending you signals that this is too much or that you're not ready or that you don't belong. It happens to everyone because that's what your nervous system is meant to do. Your nervous system is meant to keep you safe. So that means that anything that is new, that is out of your comfort zone, that is maybe bigger than what you've done in the past, your nervous system will deem it as unsafe because you don't know what the outcome is going to be, even if the outcome most of the time is going to be perfectly fine. So for example, if we're taking this podcast interview, my brain was going to all of these dark places of what if I mess up and what if I forget to press record and what if the audio doesn't work. And that's what your brain is really meant to do. And if you've ever noticed when you're going after something new or a big goal or you're really changing your path, your brain is never going to go to the what if it works? And what if this is the best thing that you've ever done? And what if it goes really well? No, your brain is literally wired to go towards the negative, towards the threat. What if it doesn't work? What if I waste my money? What if I fail? What if this is the worst decision I've ever made? And just think about yourself and the things that you've considered doing. If you're listening to this podcast, then chances are you've probably considered going on an intuitive eating journey and breaking up with dieting and healing your relationship with food and your body. Those things have probably crossed your mind. And if you haven't actively started taking those steps towards it, it's likely because your brain is going to the what if and then all the worst case scenarios. And so the reason why I want to briefly talk about this is because when you're able to become aware that this is happening and to not take those thoughts as truths, as so heavy, but actually being able to detach yourself and look at those thoughts and say, wow, how interesting. This is my nervous system trying to keep me safe. It's not the truth. A lot of the times, it's usually not the most likely outcome either. I have never once forgot to press record on a podcast. I've never once messed up the audio, but my brain was going there because it will look for those 0.001% chances of something going wrong. Because our brains, unfortunately, are not wired for growth. They're not wired for stepping out of our comfort zone. They're wired for our survival. And in order to survive, we are constantly looking out for threats. So if you ever notice yourself going into a nervous system activation response, and you'll start to feel that because your breath can get shallow, right? Or you might start getting sweaty hands, or your heart rate is going to increase, and then you got all these negative thoughts. And the last thing that you want to do is the thing that is most likely going to lead to your growth. Starting to disconnect yourself from that and not see it as this is the truth. This is a sign that I shouldn't do it. This is the sign that I'm doing something wrong. But actually, this is a sign that I'm stepping into a bigger version of me. I'm stepping into my growth. I am moving forward. I'm making progress. Then you won't feel as afraid of it. So before this interview, I was just taking some deep breaths and saying, this is great. This is actually wonderful. I'm getting to interview some really cool people on the podcast, and I normalized it. When you normalize it, you make it your new normal. It's no longer this like, I shouldn't be here, I don't belong here, imposter syndrome. It's, no, this is who I am now. This is what I do, and this is really cool. So, spoiler alert, I did not forget to record. The audio did not go wrong. Everything went really well, and I am so excited to introduce you to today's guest. We have none other than the Millennial therapist, also known as Dr. Sara Kuburic. So I'm going to give you the short intro of who she is, and we are going to talk about the topic of self-loss. So if you've ever felt like you don't know who you truly are, maybe you have spent so much of your time and your life chasing a certain ideal body, weight loss, dieting, it has consumed such a massive piece of your mental space, of your energy, of your time, then it leaves very little room to think about, what do I want really? Who am I? What values do I hold? And am I living life by those values? For example, when I was deep in my eating disorder, I told myself that some of my biggest values were friends, family, and travel. But when I hit my rock bottom, and we're going to talk about hitting your rock bottom in our interview with Sara, I had to face the really harsh realization that the things I said I valued, I was not living by. So for example, I told myself that I valued travel. However, the thought of traveling sent me into an anxiety spiral, because that means that I can't control every single thing that I eat. I can't track everything into my fitness pal. Other people are cooking for me. At the thought of going to Italy, where there would be pizza and pasta and carbs, that scared the living hell out of me, because then I might gain weight. And so no, I was saying that my value was travel, but I wasn't living by that. Another example is I said that my value was family, but I was never present with them. I was physically there with them, but I was never mentally present with them. And I wasn't my authentic self, because when you are so stressed out about food and around exercise and your body, it takes up so much of your mental space. It's really, really, really difficult to be present with who you are and in conversation. And so, no, I wasn't honoring my values of family or friendships for that matter. So when we talk about self-loss, and Sara is going to go deeper into it because she really brings light to it in her book and in all of her content on social media, one driving question that I want you to hold throughout this interview is, do I feel like I am living my true, authentic life as my true, authentic self? And even, do I know who I am meant to be? Do I know who my authentic self is? Because everyone has their own path. And as I am growing up and I'm seeing everyone around me who are the same age as me or a little bit older, I'm really recognizing that everyone has their own path. I see other people who are my age who are traveling or living abroad. And quite honestly, that doesn't interest me, at least not right now. I've done it. I've lived in France. I've lived in Italy, and I really appreciated it and it was fun, but I really missed my family. And right now, being in the comfort of my home and being close to my family and my parents and my nieces and nephews, my siblings, my friends are here, Luke is here, my apartment is here. I really enjoy that. But there are people who are in this stage of their life and they want to be living in Australia or living abroad. And so everyone has their own path. Everyone has their own passions, their own values, their own character traits. So as you listen to this interview, I would recommend maybe tuning into different aspects of your life. That could be friendships or career or family, and just getting curious as to how does it feel? Does it feel aligned? Does it feel misaligned? And this doesn't mean that you have to take action on it. It doesn't mean leave your job or leave your relationship or find new friends, but it can help you bring some awareness and to start tuning into, does my body get a certain sensation when things feel authentic, feel in alignment? Or does it also send me a signal when things feel out of alignment or like it's not meant for me? We also talk about body image and how to reconnect to your body, how to reconnect to your emotions. This is a really good conversation. So without further ado, let's play my interview with Dr. Sara Kuburic. So today we are joined by the amazing Dr. Sara Kuburic, who is an existential psychotherapist, speaker, columnist, consultant, and author of the new book, It's On Me. She is often known as the Millennial therapist from her Instagram account, which has built a community of over 1.7 million individuals. So welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, what I love so much about you is that you bring light to the concept of self-loss, which is something that I want to talk about today because it's something a lot of my listeners and clients have experienced, probably unknowingly. And it's definitely something that I experienced as well. So I do want you to share your story because I think it's so fascinating of how you got here, how you got into this work. But before we do, can you explain a little bit more about what an existential psychotherapist or therapist really is?
Yeah, for sure. So every therapist has a theory from which they practice. So let's take attachment theory. So when a therapist has a client walk into their space and is sharing their struggles and their goals, the therapist will sit there and think about attachment. They'll think about how the client is attaching, their attachment with maybe their caregivers. And that's how they're going to conceptualize or understand what is happening with the client and where they're going to lead them. And so existential psychotherapy is just a variation of that. And instead of looking at attachment, I'm looking at existential components. So I'm looking at, is the client taking responsibility? Where are they taking responsibility? Where are they not? I'm looking at freedom. Is there freedom they're not utilizing or freedom they feel has been taken away or freedom that has been taken away? And so some other fun things that we look for are, meaning and death and isolation. So these are the pillars of existentialism as a philosophy, and that's how we conceptualize our clients. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's so interesting. I would be curious, like, what made you get into this branch of therapy?
Yeah, so that's twofold. Part of it is definitely my life story in terms of going through so many existential things at such a young age. And then also just having the natural curiosity and the natural way of thinking that aligns with existentialism. I think for me, my life truly changed when I encountered existential theory. And I think when I truly took responsibility for my life. And I don't think for me, any other therapy targets responsibility just quite as hard. And yet responsibility was like the life altering, liberating thing for me. And so there's so many reasons as to why I ended up pursuing this specialization.
So I know what it means to take responsibility for your choices in your life, but for someone who's hearing this and maybe has never really dived into that world, in more like common terms, what does the term responsibility mean to you?
It means taking ownership of my life. It means taking accountability for my mistakes. It means being more intentional about decisions I'm making. And it means not living on autopilot. It means not living, from the expectations of others or narratives that are old and outdated and no longer serving me. All of this for me means responsibility of like genuinely looking out for yourself and being incredibly present and making the best decisions possible.
Yeah. I feel like we live in such a world where there's this one way of thinking. There's kind of this current or this norm. And because we get so caught up in all the small things of life and we don't really stop and ask ourselves, I know for me, what was a big turning point when I was struggling with my eating disorder was to stop and ask, like, when I'm 80 years old and I look back on the life that I lived, how will I feel if this is the path that I keep taking? And it was to put a stop to like the short term, like what feels good right now and what feels comfortable right now. And what will the future version of myself need in order to not feel this like heavy burden of regret at my death?
I love that. I think perspective is so powerful and so needed because we do things that give us immediate gratification, and I understand the tendency to do that, but what we stop doing is creating a self that we genuinely want to become. And the thing that we forget is that when we mistreat the body, and I'll use the body as an example because that's like one of the big, actually that was my favorite chapter to write in the entire book, was the chapter on the body,
Mm-hmm.
was that there are consequences. It's the consequences don't end with, and now I gained weight and now I lost weight. That is not where the consequences end. That's maybe where they begin. Maybe that's
Mm-hmm.
the thing we notice the most. But for me, and in my journey with my body, I was so incredibly disconnected for so many reasons that I was lost. And something I try to emphasize in the book is that I have never met a person who lived an authentic life that had a strenuous relationship with their body.
Yeah.
I have never met a person who hated their body and didn't feel lost. And so I think the larger consequence of that is so powerful and so important to bring to our attention, because sometimes we end up talking about our body as a tool that no longer functions and now we're annoyed, when our body is this really like crucial element of our essence, of our being. And I think it's really important to talk about that as well.
Wow, I love that you said that. I never met anyone who had a true authentic life and a strenuous relationship with their bodies. And that is so true, because when you are constantly walking into a room and you're afraid of what are people thinking or what are people saying or how am I looking, and you have all of those voices going on in your mind, it is so hard to be like, who am I? Like, how do I want to show up in the world? How do I want to be present? How do I want to, like, who do I want to be for people, instead of how are people perceiving me and what are people seeing on the outside of me?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's a hard message to hear as well, right? Like, you're like, I'm already struggling. Well, now you're saying I can't be authentic. And it's not meant to point fingers. It's just meant to say, like, there is so much more on the line, and the task of being authentic just becomes a little harder.
Yeah.
Um, I've been there. And I think if I talk about 3 points of connection and with ourselves, and that's your mind, your emotions, and your body. And I would say my body was what I was least connected with during my journey.
Mm.
And that was, my body was also the thing that kind of the catalyst for my journey of self-discovery. And so it's really interesting because I really hated my my body for pointing out the fact that I was unhappy through panic attacks and anxiety and all this stuff. And so my body played such a huge role in my healing that now I'm like, okay, everyone, pay attention to your bodies.
Yeah.
Because it is, I mean, mental health and physical health, we know are so connected.
Yeah. So I know that you have probably told your story so many times as you've been on your book tour, but could you maybe give us like a shorter version of how you got to where you are? And you mentioned you had a strenuous relationship with your body. I know that you also found yourself at a point where you were like, this is not who I want to be. I'm not happy. So can you tell us a little bit more about your story?
Sure. The Spark Note version. So I think what's important to kind of, let's start at the beginning. So I was born in Bosnia, and then the Bosnian War started. Then we ran to Serbia, then we lived in Serbia, then the Kosovo War started, the NATO bombing started, and then we immigrated to Canada. So the reason why this component of the story is important is because from a really young age, I went into self-preservation, and not so much self-expression, self-awareness. No one in the bomb shelters was asking you like, are you taking deep breaths? Does your back hurt from like laying on the ground? Are you necessarily even eating all the types of foods you like to eat? That was not a consideration. So I had probably at that age already started to disconnect. The settings were quite uncomfortable. They were smoky. There were cramped people in there. It was dirty. It was not something that you like. And so I, reflecting back, think that that's a time when I was like, okay, you know what? I'm just gonna let my body be there, but I'm not gonna presently be in my body there. And so from that young age, I went into self-preservation probably until my early to mid 20s. And this is when I talk in my book. I'm hanging out with a friend in LA, and we're talking about the fact I'm in grad school, the fact that I'm like married, the fact that all these things are lining up and people are just super proud of me and happy for me. And he goes, instead of going, oh my God, you must be so happy, which is what everyone else in my life has done, this assumption that I am very happy. He went, so great. It's so nice to hear you're doing so well, but are you happy? And that one question broke me because I don't think anyone's asked me that before. And so I remember crying and going into the bathroom and staring in the mirror. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience where you look in a mirror and you're like, who is this person? I mean, like, you hear people being like intoxicated at a club and looking at themselves and be like, who is she? Or like in a plane and just being like, what is happening? And I had one of those moments, fully sober, and just being like, wow, I understand it's me because she's like doing everything I'm doing in the mirror. She's reflecting me, but she does not feel like me. She feels like a stranger. And I think that was really the moment where I realized, okay, something is wrong. I am so unhappy and I don't know the person I have become. And that is an incredibly, incredibly horrifying and isolating experience. And also not an experience that's easy to describe to someone. Everyone's like, well, you're in your 20s. Well, like, it's okay. Like, you'll figure it out. Like, it does not hold the gravity of the situation very well. So obviously I had a really public breakdown in a restaurant, which was super embarrassing for someone who does not display emotions.
Yeah.
At that time, like super, super embarrassing. My friend was really uncomfortable. And after that, I went back to my hotel room and was like, wow, I did it. Whew, that was a hurdle. I have now overcome all this past whatever. Congrats me. Like it was delusional. Like it was like hubris and delusional. And I was like, it must be because I'm a psych student. Like just, oh my God. Anyway, so I go to my room and I order like food and I watch Friends to celebrate my great success as one. So I was like, awesome. The next day, I'm packing up my stuff to go back to Vancouver, which is where I'm from, and I start to like feel super uneasy in my body, and I ignore it because that's what I do. And it just progressed so rapidly that by the time I sat on the plane and buckled my seatbelt in, I actually had my very first panic attack, and it wasn't just like, oh, my heart's beating fast and I'm sweating. I went into paralysis. Like I lost function of my limbs and then eventually my ability to speak. And the paramedics came, and it was probably the scariest experience of my life. But I think my body needed to take that action because I would have literally gone home and just kept living my life.
Yeah, you wouldn't have woken up from it.
No, like I had an awakening and then I was like, wow. And I would have done nothing about it. And so it was interesting because I feel like my body kept me accountable from the very first panic attack. I didn't stop having panic attacks until I changed everything I needed to change. And then they stopped.
Wow.
And although I was incredibly scared of my body at the start, because it literally I could have a normal day and then it would just flick on and I would have to go into my room. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't be around people. I had to pull over with my car. I had to, everything was so oriented around my panic attacks. And so I used to resent my body for it and be scared of my body for it until I realized what it was actually trying to do. That was
Mm-hmm.
not a short version at all. That was like the long version, but you
No,
got
but
it.
you gave all the best details, so that's all that matters. I'm so curious when you started having those panic attacks, and that was really your body communicating, like, you need to listen, you need to start paying attention. What do you think that you were ignoring for so long? Like those different aspects of your life that you were like, no, this is great, and this is happening to me, and it wasn't your path.
Yeah, none of it was my path. I think at that point, I actually ended up changing everything except the fact that I'm a psych. That was the one true, very authentic thing that remained. But pretty much all my friendships at the time changed or were, I don't want to say cut off, but let go of.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my marriage ended, even where I lived. This is when I started to travel. I think for me, it's not even the decision itself, it's the fact that it wasn't my decision. There's nothing wrong with being married and being in grad school and having a house. Like, there's nothing wrong with these things. They just didn't feel like my decisions.
Mm.
And so I think for me, again, my personality became self-preservation. I wasn't overly emotional. I was super blunt. I kept people at an arm's length. I did a lot of trauma responses. That's how I built my relationships. And so I think a lot of it was kind of unraveling and seeing all the things I was not in order to have space to become who I am. And so a lot of changes were made, but even it's not like the changes themselves miraculously cured me. So I have like a point in the book where I say, okay, a year later, I'm sitting there, I'm journaling and I'm crying because I'm like, I've made all these changes and I still don't feel better. And that's because I made all these external changes, but I still didn't want to sit with what was in the inside. And so until I truly faced myself and my own discomfort and my own kind of inner void, things didn't change by just me like cutting off contact with a couple of friends or even getting that divorce.
Yeah.
It's a lot more than that.
And I'm curious as to when you started realizing I need to make real changes to my life. I think a lot of people experience that where they're in an unhappy marriage or they're having a friend group that's not the right friend group for them, or they have a career that's not right for them. And a lot of the times we like ignore that in our 20s or 30s, and then it starts nagging on us in our 40s and 50s. And at that point, we have this feeling of like, well, I've committed so much to it. And you can even have that feeling in your 20s. Like I had that feeling, and you're like, well, I've already invested so much. Like, at this point, what's the point of starting all over? So for you, was there a lot of fear to realize like, oh, a lot of big changes need to be made?
So this is maybe where I am. No, there wasn't. And here's why. And I hope others don't have to experience this. I experienced my rock bottom. What I mean by that is like, I thought at that airport when I had my first panic attack that I was actually dying. Like that was how, others didn't know what was wrong with me. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to die before I've lived.
Mm.
In that moment, I would have traded anything to have a fulfilling life. I really didn't care about people's feelings. I didn't care about what was meant for me, quote unquote, what was right, what was wrong. I just was like, oh my God, I missed it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course I care about other people's feelings, but in that moment, you
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
just because Sally's gonna be mad that I put up some boundaries, like that
Mm-hmm.
became so laughable.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was like, it's me or them, and I'm going to choose me. Like it was a very survival type instinct. And then, yeah, so I think when you're hitting that rock bottom or when you have constant anxiety there and you feel like your life is so restricted or reduced at one point to my bedroom because I couldn't really leave without feeling anxious,
Yeah.
nothing else really matters. It really puts things into perspective for you. So I think I got that perspective from pretty severe anxiety. And then I also had the relief, like tastes of relief whenever I did something authentic. And once you taste authenticity, nothing else will ever taste as good.
Yeah.
And I think that was something that kind of kept me going. Also, luckily for me, I was young. I think there's something about being brave and reckless and like that
Mm-hmm.
worked in my yeah, to my benefit, being like 24 and just being like, well, too young to give up now. And so yeah, there wasn't too much fear. I had no idea what I was doing, but I also have to acknowledge that I have a really amazing family and
Mhm.
that there was like a safety net in a community that I knew that regardless of what I was doing, I wouldn't be left alone. And I understand that not everyone has that.
Mhm.
So that was a really huge support for me, for my emotional and mental health. But I hope others do not have to hit this rock bottom, before they make these changes.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I wanted to go because let's talk in terms of different people's context and life situations. How do you begin if someone feels like they've lost themselves? And this often happens when your entire life goal has been, I'm going to lose the weight. I'm going to lose the weight. And it seems when you say it out loud, it seems like, how can this be your life goal? But it really is. And that used to be mine. My entire life revolved around, what am I going to eat? What can I eat? What are people going to say? What do I look like going to the gym? And it takes up so much of your mental space that it literally does not leave room for any higher thinking and self-actualization of, what are my hobbies? What am I passionate about? Am I happy in my relationship? Like, we don't have that time to sit in the present. So for anyone who, we obviously don't want you to hit a rock bottom for you to decide that something needs to change. If a listener right now feels like, this was not meant to be my life, I am meant for so much more, and I want to begin to change, I don't want to hit my rock bottom where I'm forced to
Mhm.
change, where do you even start?
Let's presume that the most strain you feel is in your with your physical body. Is that what we're assuming?
Yeah.
Although I'm assuming that if one component is strained, all of them are strained most of the time. It's almost
Yeah.
impossible. Like, I'm so emotionally attuned and I don't listen to my body. It's like, well,
Yeah.
but I think take it really slow. For me, was restructuring my beliefs around what my body was. Um, my body used to be a tool and he almost used to be a servant. What I mean by that is I didn't pay attention to it until it did something wrong.
Mm.
I never thanked it. When it did its job, I was like, yeah, that was your job. It's like
Yeah,
a
that's what
waiter.
you're meant to do.
Yeah, think about like people with waiters. They're like, I'm not gonna like pat them on the back for the fact that my food came out perfectly and like on time and they were friendly. Like, that's their job. Like,
Yeah.
there's so much attitude towards that. But let's say that I gained a bit of weight or I got sick or I had pimples, then I would turn my attention to it. It was actually quite an abusive relationship.
Hmm.
Um, and what I had to understand is that my body's purpose was not there for me to look good.
Yeah.
That is not what my body was designed for. And I have this comparison of like, it would be like looking at a heart surgeon and being like, damn, you have really nice hair. Like, that would be like your whole thing is like Bobby has great hair. He like
Hmm.
saved 100 people that day, and like you don't even not like acknowledge what he does. You're just like, but his hair is amazing. That's what I think we do with our body. And so I had to actually come to this realization that my body is not just something I have; it's who I am. And when you start to see that as a really important part of who you are, you start to invite it to the table in terms of the decisions that you make, in terms of how you speak to it, in terms of what you think its purpose is.
Hmm.
And I think it's humbling when we truly understand just how powerful the body is and how much our body knows, sometimes more than we do,
Hmm.
and the power we can get from aligning with that. And so for me, a lot of my journey was restructuring that relationship because it said, I am where I don't want to be and I don't know how to get out of it. Okay, cool. But the way to get out of it is just to actually become aligned and intimate with these pieces of yourself that you have left unattended.
Yeah.
It's not external. That's the thing. We always are like, and then the solution is, it's like,
Yeah.
no, the solution is to stop ignoring what you've ignored and see how your path changes.
Yeah.
And for me, that started with like restructuring the beliefs. I mean, there's so much more obviously in that chapter as well, but it really started with like, what is my body here for and how am I supposed to relate to it? And what is the power dynamic between me and my body?
Yeah, because so many of us, and I did this for years, is we've been taught that the only way to be quote unquote healthy is to look outside of you. So you're going to count the calories and you're going to follow the meal plans and you're going to restrict the carbs and you're always going to stop trusting yourself and you're going to listen to what other people tell you that you should be doing. And then as a result, your body's like, well, you're not going to listen to me anymore. I'm telling you I'm hungry and you're going to drink black coffee instead. Or I'm telling you I'm hungry and you're going to go for a walk or chew gum instead. And so you lose so much trust with your body that when we talk about like, okay, how does it feel to be hungry? How does it feel to be full? How does it feel to be satisfied? What does a craving feel like? There's a lot of confusion over the years because you no longer pay attention to that. You're paying attention to how much did I eat for breakfast? How much am I allowed to eat for lunch or for dinner? And it's all about numbers. And so I think a lot of us are scared to reconnect to our bodies. We're scared to trust ourselves. And a lot of it comes down to, what if I trust myself? And as a result of trusting myself, I gain weight. And what you said is like, my body is who I am. A lot of women will then associate with their bodies and they give it a meaning. If I gain weight, it means I'm a failure. I've done something wrong. I'm unlovable. I'm not worthy. And of course, if you make gaining weight such a significant event that affects your self-worth, it's going to be the scariest thing in your life.
Oh my God, absolutely. I mean, when we talk about trusting ourselves, we also have to understand that trust comes from safety. You can't trust someone that feels unsafe, and trust is not an immediate development. Trust takes time.
Yeah.
And I think that's how we have to see this relationship. I think when there is like such a strong correlation with the dieting world of like, I do this, then I gain this, I do this, and I lose this. I think that's how we assume our inner relationship will work as well. It's like this immediate correlation, and relationships are a slow burn.
Yeah.
It's going to take a while for you to build safety in terms of you actually want what's best for me. Depending on what my client's relationship to their body is, not if someone has an actual eating disorder, but someone who has a lack of trust in their body, sometimes I'll get them to do an exercise in terms of, okay, for a week, just a week, or 4 days, 5 days, whatever their threshold is, I want you to intuitively eat. Let's see what happens. Let's see how you feel in your body. Let's see if you want to check your weight at the end of it. Sure. Let's just check, will your body all of a sudden, because everyone assumes like, I will go out of control. Like this is the assumption. Yeah. I will start to, and obviously if you binge, this is again, not what I'm talking about in this moment, but everyone is assuming that they're going to be eating McDonald's every day or like not moving at all. The truth is your body likes movement. The truth is your body likes nutrients.
Yeah.
And I have never had a client come back and be like, wow, I am way worse off by doing this. And that exercise is not meant for me to be like, you should intuitively eat. I'm not a nutritionist. Like I am not going to impose that on you. But what I'm trying to teach you is that you can probably trust your body. A lot of the times we can trust our body. And if our body is doing something to harm us, I think it's so important to go, why? What need is actually being met? Because the way it's trying to achieve this need is not super healthy, but it is trying to help you out. And there's a lot of trauma processing that goes around food that needs to be taken into consideration. But yeah, you bring out such a good point of like, we need to build that safety with our body. How many of us feel safe, wanted, accepted by our own bodies and vice versa? And so that just takes time. And I hope whoever's listening and is on this journey is like, test your body a little bit. See how it responds. And you don't need to control. I know it's like for a lot of people, it's a control thing. You do not need to control your body in order for it to serve you. Your body can probably even serve you better if you let go of these beliefs and these controlling tactics that we're so used to.
Yeah, and it's so hard to hear when your entire life you've been told that you need to control your food, you need to control your body. And when I go and tell them, actually, when you start releasing some of that control and you move into trust, control is not an issue. Like I used to be a massive binge eater, and now people who don't really know me in intuitive eating, they'll be like, wow, you have so much self-control. And it's like, no, self-control is not an issue. I listen to my body in the same way that like when I'm thirsty, when you're thirsty, you'll drink water and you'll stop drinking when you're no longer thirsty anymore.
Mhm.
Before we wrap things up, I would love to touch a little bit on the emotional piece, because a lot of people will use food as a way to not feel emotions that need to be felt. And that's very similar to that self-preservation that you lived with for so long. It's like these emotions feel painful, they feel uncomfortable, therefore I'm going to eat away. I'm not going to feel it. And so that's another piece that can be really hard, is when I start doing the work to heal my relationship with food, I will start feeling emotions that I haven't allowed myself to feel for years now. So that can be really scary. And that can be a reason that people want to have a healthy relationship with food, but they also don't want to let go of emotional eating because that can be really painful. So how would you navigate that?
Yeah. First of all, be gentle with yourself. And second of all, what you're doing when you're eating is you're self-soothing. So let's find another way to self-soothe. I always say even a destructive behavior is, as I said, probably meeting a need. So let's meet that need in a healthy way. So right now, if you're soothing by grabbing that bag of chips or perpetually making hot chocolate, I don't know what it might be. Let's teach you some breathing exercises or maybe tactile soothing. A lot of people don't realize that tactile soothing is a real thing. So actually drinking, actually making the coffee, like there's a ritual, there is something so relaxing about it. So let's get you another ritual that can also benefit you. And so a lot of the times it's spotting those behaviors or those moments when we're soothing and then just swapping them out for new behaviors. I'm a tactile soothe. Like I really like materials. So what kind of material I have on me really matters. And like, I'll notice that when I'm stressed or I'm working, I'll just be like touching my shoulder, like, and that's because I realize like tactile things really suit me and that's really helpful for me. And so figuring out what works for you is half the challenge. And once you do, you get to experiment and have fun and take care of your body in a completely new way.
Yeah, and I love how you said the have fun piece, because it can actually be light. It doesn't have to be so heavy. And you mentioned you and textiles. Like for me, it was temperature. I realized that being in heat and like having a heat blanket and taking a bath, like that was really soothing for me. And one of the reasons why I would turn to food is because I have Raynaud's, which means I have really poor circulation to my hands and feet. And so I would like try to find a way to warm myself up. So it can be fun. It doesn't need to be so heavy. And the more heavy you make it, the harder it's going to be for you. So like you said, be gentle on yourself and approach it from a place of curiosity, as if you were like coaching a friend through it and there wasn't like this heavy consequence on the end of it. It's fun, it's research, it's data collection, and you'll get to figure out who you are, what you like, what you don't like, and what you need specifically, because no one else is going to be able to tell you that.
That's a beautiful summary. I love it. Exactly what it is.
Thank you so much for being here. And where can people find you, find your book, find your Instagram?
Sure. So I'm most active on my Instagram, which is @millennial.therapist. You can buy my book anywhere books are sold. And I do have a newsletter, which is really fun and goes a bit more in depth than my Instagram. And it's notes from my phone on Substack. So you can look me up there as well.
Amazing. Thank you so, so much for being here. I really appreciate you. And thank you to all of you for listening. And we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram @SabrinaMagnaHealth for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode.